A woman cut in front of me at the grocery store, snapping, "I have places to be, you can wait." When I refused to move, she screamed, "I'll get you banned from this store." Minutes later, the manager walked over, but instead of scolding me, he pointed at her and said, "Ma'am, we need to talk about your past incidents." Her face turned pale as security stepped forward. After a grueling day at work, I decided to stop by the local grocery store to pick up a few essentials before heading home. The store, located just a few blocks from my apartment, was a place I frequented regularly. Its familiar aisles and friendly staff made it a comfortable spot for my routine shopping. That evening, however, was about to take an unexpected turn. As I approached the store, I noticed the parking lot was unusually crowded. It seemed like everyone had the same idea to shop at that hour. I sighed, anticipating longer lines, but resigned myself to the task. Entering the store, the bright fluorescent lights illuminated the bustling scene, shoppers weaving through aisles, carts filled to the brim, and the hum of conversations blending with the occasional beep of scanned items. I grabbed a basket, aiming to make my trip as swift as possible. Navigating through the crowded aisles, I selected a few items: a carton of milk, a loaf of whole grain bread, some fresh vegetables, and a pack of chicken breasts. My basket wasn't heavy, but the congestion made movement slow. After about 15 minutes, I had everything I needed and headed toward the checkout area. The lines were predictably long, stretching down the aisles. I scanned for the shortest one and found an express lane designated for customers with 10 items or fewer. Perfect. I counted my items to ensure I qualified and then took my place at the end of the line. There were about 4 people ahead of me, each with small baskets similar to mine. As I waited, I pulled out my phone to pass the time, scrolling through emails and news headlines. The line moved steadily, and soon I was second in line, behind an elderly gentleman who was meticulously placing his items on the conveyor belt. I smiled, appreciating his careful nature. Just then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a woman approaching the line from the side. She was dressed in a crisp business suit, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and she exuded an air of impatience. Without hesitation, she stepped directly in front of me, inserting herself between me and the elderly man who was now paying for his items. I was taken aback. Perhaps she hadn't noticed the line? I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Excuse me," I said politely, "the line actually starts back there." I gestured toward the end of the line, where a few more customers had since joined. She turned to face me, her expression a mix of annoyance and condescension. "I have places to be," she snapped. "You can wait." Her tone was sharp, and her words stung. I felt a flush of irritation but maintained my composure. "We all have places to be," I replied evenly. "But there's a line, and it's only fair to wait your turn." She rolled her eyes dramatically and let out an exasperated sigh. "Look," she said, her voice dripping with impatience, "I don't have time for this. Just let me go ahead." I stood firm. "I'm sorry, but that's not fair to everyone else who's been waiting." The tension between us was palpable. Other shoppers began to take notice, their eyes darting between us, sensing the brewing confrontation. Suddenly, her face twisted into a scowl, and she raised her voice. "I'll get you banned from this store," she threatened, her words echoing through the checkout area. I was stunned. Banned? For standing in line? This was escalating far beyond what I had anticipated. "I'm not sure how you plan to do that," I responded, trying to keep my voice calm, "but I don't think standing up for fairness warrants such a reaction." Before she could retort, a man in a store manager's uniform approached us. His name tag read Mark, and his expression was a blend of concern and authority. He had clearly been alerted to the commotion and had come to address the situation. "Is there a problem here?" Mark asked, his eyes shifting between the woman and me. The woman immediately launched into a tirade. "This man is harassing me. I was just trying to check out quickly, and he started causing a scene." Mark turned to me, his eyebrows raised in inquiry. I took a deep breath and explained, "I was waiting in line when she stepped in front of me." I politely informed her that there was a line, and she became upset. Mark nodded slowly, absorbing both sides of the story. Then, to my surprise, he turned back to the woman with a stern expression. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "we need to talk about your past incidents in this store." The color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her earlier bravado evaporating. Mark gestured toward the customer service desk. "Please come with me." At that moment, 2 security guards approached from the side, their presence commanding and unyielding. The woman's eyes widened in panic. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed. "I haven't done anything wrong." Mark remained resolute. "We've had multiple complaints about your behavior in the past. It's time we address them." Realizing she was outnumbered and without support, the woman reluctantly followed Mark and the security guards toward the customer service area. The other shoppers watched in silence as the scene unfolded, a collective sense of justice hanging in the air. I stood there, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. I hadn't expected the situation to escalate so dramatically. As the line began to move again, the cashier offered me an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," she said softly. I nodded, still processing what had just happened. "Thank you," I replied, placing my items on the conveyor belt. As I left the store that evening, the encounter replayed in my mind. It served as a stark reminder of the importance of patience, respect, and the simple act of waiting one's turn. In a world where everyone has places to be, common courtesy goes a long way. As I was walking toward the parking lot, still trying to shake off what had just happened, I noticed something strange. That same woman, the one who had just been escorted away by security, was standing by a black SUV parked a few rows away from my car. She was on her phone, pacing back and forth, clearly upset. Her arms were flailing, and her face was red, part anger, part humiliation. I didn't think much of it until I got closer to my car and realized something wasn't right. My driver's side mirror had been snapped clean off. Not just pushed or bent, snapped. Hanging there like a broken wing. My heart dropped. I glanced around the lot, looking for someone who might have seen what happened. A couple was loading groceries into their trunk nearby. I walked over and asked if they'd seen anything. The man looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to get involved, but his wife nudged him. "She kicked it," she said quietly. "That woman from inside." After they let her go, "She walked over and kicked your mirror." The husband added, "She waited until nobody was around. Then she made a call and did it." I was too far to stop her. I thanked them and took a photo of the damage. I also snapped a picture of her SUV and license plate, just in case. I went back into the store and asked to speak with Mark again. He came out after a few minutes, still looking a bit tense from earlier. I showed him the photos and explained what the couple had told me. His jaw clenched. "We just let her go," he muttered. "She was cooperative, apologized, said she overreacted. We didn't want to escalate." I shook my head. "Well, she escalated it." Mark took the photos and said he'd call the security team again. He seemed genuinely concerned now. "We have cameras in the parking lot. I'll review the footage. If it checks out, we'll file a police report. You should too." I spent the next hour at the nearby precinct, filing a report with an officer who, thankfully, took it seriously. I gave him everything: photos, the names of the witnesses, and the store manager's info. He told me they'd follow up, especially since there was video evidence. I thought that would be the end of it. Just a crazy woman who had a meltdown, lashed out, and would probably face some consequences. I didn't expect what came next. The following week, I started getting calls from an unknown number. They never left a voicemail. Just call after call. Eventually, I blocked it. Then a different number started. Same thing. Then it moved to my work phone. I don't know how she got that number, but it was her. I picked up one day out of frustration, and before I could say anything, I heard her voice. "Calm. Too calm. You should have just let me go first," she said. "This didn't need to happen." I hung up. Immediately blocked that number too. My hands were shaking. I told my boss what was going on, just in case something escalated further. Thankfully, he was understanding. I also let the police know. They added the calls to the report. But it didn't stop. A few days later, I came out to my car after work and found a note under my windshield wiper. No envelope. Just a torn piece of notebook paper. It said, "You're making this worse for yourself. Drop the charges." I froze. I looked around the lot. It was almost empty, the winter sun already setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. I didn't see anyone, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. She had been here. Back to the police I went. This time they were more concerned. They told me it looked like harassment, possibly stalking, and they were going to elevate the case. I gave them the note and told them about the calls. The officer asked if I had a home security system. I didn't. That night, I ordered cameras for my apartment and doorbell. I also started noticing a car, dark SUV, same kind as hers, parked down the street from my building more than once. It would be gone by the time I got outside, but it showed up just often enough to make me paranoid. I didn't sleep much those first few nights after that. Mark, the store manager, called me a few days later. He told me they had reviewed the footage and confirmed she was the one who damaged my car. The store had already provided the footage to the police. But then he said something else. "She's done this before. Not exactly the same, but similar. Aggressive behavior, shouting matches, even got physical once with a customer last year. We tried banning her, but she always comes back. Different clothes, different hair. Sometimes sunglasses. Always causes problems." I asked why they hadn't pressed charges. He hesitated. "She's connected," he said quietly. "Or at least, she claims to be. Knows someone on the city council. Whenever we report her, someone calls us and pressures us to let it go. We're a small store. We can't afford bad press or lawsuits. Now things made more sense. Her arrogance, her confidence that she'd get me banned, her total lack of fear in front of store staff. She thought she was untouchable. But I wasn't about to let it go. I decided to dig. I started with her license plate. A friend of mine works in a private investigations office, not law enforcement, but close enough. I called him, explained everything. He was hesitant at first, but when I told him what she'd done and the fact that it was escalating, he agreed to look into it. A week later, he called me back. "You're not gonna like this," he said. "Her name's Melanie. She's been flagged in several incident reports. Public records show complaints filed against her at 3 different businesses. Same behavior. One place even got a restraining order. But they never followed through." He sent me the documents. My hands shook as I read through them. Same pattern. Same behavior. Intimidation. Playing the victim. Using vague threats about connections in local politics. I sent the info to the officer on my case. He thanked me and said they were taking it seriously now. But I could tell from his voice he wasn't sure how far it would go. Not with her connections. I thought maybe I'd hit a wall. But then something happened that changed everything. I was checking my doorbell camera feed one night when I saw her. Melanie. Clear as day. Standing at my front door. She didn't knock. She just stood there for about 20 seconds, looking straight at the camera. No expression. Then she turned and walked away. She wanted me to know she was watching. She wanted me scared. But she didn't realize something. This time, I had her on video. And this time, I wasn't alone. I took the footage straight to the police the next morning. The officer on my case, Detective Harris, leaned in close as he watched the clip. He didn't say anything for a few seconds, just stared at the screen, his lips pressed into a tight line. "This helps," he finally said. "That's your front door." She didn't knock. She didn't leave anything. Just stood there. This isn't just harassment anymore. This is intimidation. He asked if I wanted a restraining order. I said yes. But here's the thing about restraining orders, getting one isn't instant. It takes paperwork, a hearing, and in most cases, proof that you're truly being threatened. Even with the footage, they said it might take a week or 2 to process. Maybe longer if her lawyer got involved. I couldn't sit around and wait. I started parking my car in a different spot every night. I varied my route to and from work. I told my neighbors what was going on, and a couple of them offered to keep an eye out. I even stayed at a friend's house for a few nights, just to clear my head and feel safe again. But it didn't stop. 3 days after filing for the restraining order, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single printed photo, my apartment building, taken from across the street. My car was in the shot. So was I, coming out the front door. She was watching. Still, that was it for me. I gave the photo to Detective Harris, who immediately filed an update to my case. He said he'd escalate the request for the restraining order and also file for a warrant to pull phone records and potentially track her movements. But again, red tape. Then another twist. Mark from the grocery store called again, only this time he sounded different, nervous, almost shaky. "You're not gonna believe this," he said. Melanie came back. I couldn't believe it. "After everything? You let her in the store?" We didn't recognize her right away. She wore a wig. Different jacket. She tried going through self-checkout, but someone recognized her voice. She was shouting at a cashier about a coupon. Of course she was. We called security, but before they arrived, she ran. Left her stuff, just bolted. But here's where it got weird. Mark told me that when they reviewed the security footage, she wasn't alone. There was a man with her. Middle-aged. Balding. Kept his head down the whole time. Didn't say a word. Paid close attention to where the cameras were. Mark said it was like he'd done this before. "She's not acting alone," Mark said. "She brought someone with her. We're reporting it, obviously. But I thought you should know. This wasn't just a petty feud anymore. She had help." Later that night, I heard a knock at the door. I froze. I never get visitors late, especially not after everything. I checked the camera feed first. Thank God I did. It wasn't her, but it wasn't someone I knew either. It was the same man from the footage. Balding. Wearing a hood now. Just standing there. Not knocking again. Just standing. I didn't answer. I called the police immediately. But by the time they got there, he was gone. The officer searched the area, but there was nothing. No sign of him. No vehicle description. No name. Harris reviewed the new footage the next morning. He didn't speak for a full minute. "She's getting bolder," he finally muttered. "And now she's dragging others into it." I told him I was starting to worry this wouldn't stop until something really bad happened. He didn't disagree. He mentioned something else off the record. Apparently, Melanie had a history beyond the local stuff. A few incidents in other states. No arrests, but her name came up in several police reports. Always the same pattern: aggressive, manipulative, volatile. She knew how to work just inside the lines. Just enough to scare people, push them, but not enough to get charged. And now she was getting sloppy. Later that week, my PI friend called again. "You're not the only one she's targeting right now," he said. That hit me hard. He found posts on a neighborhood forum. A woman across town had a similar story: bizarre notes, strange visitors, even a photo left in her mailbox. The woman didn't go to police. She thought it was her ex. But when my friend showed her Melanie's photo, she recognized her immediately. She'd hired Melanie for something months ago, a consulting gig, something vague, but things went sideways. There was a disagreement over money. That's when the strange behavior started. So it wasn't just me. I wasn't the first. And I might not be the last. That's when it hit me. Melanie wasn't just having some unhinged moment at the grocery store. She was calculated. She was rehearsed. And she'd been doing this for years, to anyone who crossed her. She used fear like a tool, control like a weapon. And now she was slipping, which meant I might finally have a chance to bring her down. I didn't sleep the night after I found out Melanie had done this before. To other people. The pattern was clear now: push, threaten, disappear. But she'd always stayed in the shadows, just far enough from real consequences. I couldn't stop wondering why no one ever took it far enough to make it stick. That morning, I decided to stop being passive. I went back to the grocery store with Detective Harris. Mark agreed to meet us in the break room. He'd already sent over the footage, but now we were going to talk through every single detail. We paused the screen right at the frame where Melanie and the man stood in self-checkout. "I've seen that guy before," Mark said suddenly. "He's been here before, weeks ago. Watching. Never buying anything." "Think he was scouting?" Harris asked. Mark nodded. "Feels like it." We reviewed everything again. Then Harris dropped the bomb. "We've issued the restraining order. And we're about to bring her in for questioning." I exhaled so hard it felt like I'd been holding my breath for weeks. But the real moment came 2 days later. Melanie came back. She didn't come alone. She brought the same man from the footage. I didn't know they'd returned until I got a call from Mark. "She's here. Again." But this time, we called police before she even opened her mouth. I got there fast. Maybe too fast. Part of me knew I shouldn't show up, that it could escalate things. But I needed to see it. By the time I arrived, police were already inside with her. She wasn't yelling this time. She was crying. It was all so fake. I could see right through it. The tears, the hand gestures, the shrill voice claiming it was all a misunderstanding. She even accused Mark of harassing her, said she was being targeted unfairly, and that the man from the line started all this because I wouldn't flirt with him. My stomach turned. Mark's jaw tightened. "That's a lie, Melanie." "No, it's not," she shouted, snapping around. "You're all trying to ruin my life." "And for what?" "For saying I had somewhere to be." And then she looked at me. "You should have just moved," she hissed. Everyone went silent. A moment where the room shifted, like air sucked out of it. Then Harris stepped in. Calm but firm. "We know everything. You've done this to at least 4 people. We have statements, security footage, and your voice on a recorded call. And now we have you on video at his front door. This isn't just drama anymore. It's harassment. It's stalking. And it's criminal." Melanie's face twisted into something I can only describe as broken. Not rage. Not fear. Something cracked deep down. Her knees gave a little, and she had to catch herself against a cart. The man with her? He didn't say a word. Just backed away, pulled out his phone, and started walking. An officer stopped him, asked for ID. That's when Melanie lost it. "You said you'd help me," she screamed at the man. "You said I'd be safe." He didn't even turn around. She lunged toward him, and 2 officers immediately grabbed her. "You used me," she shouted. "I paid you." That was it. The last crack. The whole thing blew open right there in the middle of the store. Turns out, the man was someone she had hired. She paid him for help after she started losing control, after the incident with me. But he'd bailed the second it got too hot. She had no real connections. No politician friends. No high-powered lawyers. Just years of smoke and mirrors, bluffing, and finding people to do her dirty work. She thought intimidation was power. She thought fear was loyalty. They arrested her that day. In the parking lot afterward, Mark looked tired but relieved. "You were the only one who didn't back down," he said. "You didn't just wait for it to go away." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. The weight of it all hit me harder than I expected. The aftermath wasn't clean. She tried to contact me one more time, through a burner account online, rambling about betrayal and trust. It was pathetic. I didn't respond. I kept my cameras up. I still do. I still vary my routine, double-check my locks, keep copies of everything. But eventually, the calls stopped. The SUV never showed again. The notes stopped, and silence returned. Mark gave me a gift card to the store a few weeks later as a thank you, but I never used it. I haven't been back. I drive a few extra miles now to a different grocery store. I still see that mirror hanging broken when I close my eyes sometimes. Not because it was expensive or hard to fix, but because it marked the moment I realized how far someone would go just to avoid being told no. The truth is, it wasn't about the line. It never was. It was about control. About dominance. About someone who had never been told to stop, finally hearing it and snapping. It made me think about all the quiet people she must have hurt who never said anything. Who moved out of the way, just to avoid the storm. I didn't. And for the first time in a long time, I don't feel small for speaking up. I don't know what happens to people like her. Maybe she gets help. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe she'll show up again someday and I'll have to deal with it all over. But I'm ready now. I've learned that silence isn't peace. And standing your ground isn't aggression. It's survival. And for once, I don't feel afraid.